learning about different characters in the Bible. You made the list up there. I circled the ones that we're going to talk about. We've already done a couple. We're going to learn from them how to move our lives closer to the dream that God has for us. Some of you are going to remember a little bit about this game we do here, but if we're going to learn, we're going to play a game. That's the way kids learn. It should be the way adults learn. So today's game is called Fact or Scat. Some of you have played a version of this at home called Fact or Don't Say That Word, because there's youngsters still around. But I'm going to give you a sentence about Mary Magdalene, our saint for the day. It's our feast day tomorrow. You're going to raise your hand. If you think that the sentence I say is true, you're going to raise your hand. Fact. If you think that sentence is false, the Bible word for false today is scat. You're going to keep your hand down. Does that make sense? Easy. Okay, fact or scat? Mary Magdalene was secretly married to Jesus. Fact or scat? Yeah, absolutely. It's nonsense. That whole Dan Brown Da Vinci Code is ridiculous. It's fun for conspiracy theorists. I mean, if you really want to believe in like Sasquatch or chemtrails or trickle-down economics. But there's no evidence for any of it. None, squat, zilch. It's total scat. So fact or scat? Mary Magdalene was the first person to see the resurrection. Fact or scat? Yeah, very good. Now, some of you might remember that Peter runs to check on the tomb, but he doesn't know whether Jesus has risen. We don't know if he's excited. He ran because he's excited, or he ran because he didn't believe Mary Magdalene. I know this is a shock to some of you, but sometimes men don't believe women. Back in those days, if a woman testified in court, her testimony didn't matter. If 3 women testified in court one thing, and one man said another, who do you think the court believed? Yeah, good thing that doesn't happen anymore. But it's a remarkable thing that God has taken the most important story in the Christian story and given it to a woman. Amen? Okay, fact or scat? Some of you are 2 for 2 so far. Jesus met Mary through a widow's grief support group. Now we have some disagreement in the group here. We will read later from Luke. Jesus traveled with 12 young men and with some women who he had healed. He names 3 of them, Joanna and Susanna and Mary Magdalene, who'd been cured of 7 demons. We have no idea what that 7 demons means. We do know the Hebrew for like 7, that numbers mean something for Hebrews. In America, not usually, but if I say 9/11, what does that mean? Yeah, that means something. That carries some weight. And the number 7 to Hebrews carries some weight. So 7 means infinite. It means perfect. So maybe before she met Jesus, her life felt infinitely messed up. Has anyone felt that way? The grief, the addiction, the despair, the abuse, the loss, the bad decisions that you do to keep piling onto yourself. You been there? Maybe she felt like that. And Luke says these women had been healed of that. And what he also says is they had the money. So they were either married to rich guys, and how many rich guys in the first century would just let their wives go wander around with 13 weirdos in the desert? Probably not. Or the only way that women could get money back then was if their husbands died and they inherited that. So likely before they met Jesus, at least these 3 women had spent time together, supporting each other, because who else would? And amidst that pain and stigma and across all those boundaries, this man shows up, the only man who had ever listened to them, certainly the only man who could hold their sadness with honor, and somehow they felt healed and they followed. And that's the kind of thing Jesus did all the time. My guess, just a guess, but wouldn't it be another Jesus-y thing if he had dispatched those women to teach other women how to care for people in pain? Wouldn't it be a Jesus-y thing if he took those women, these widows, and he had them teach the young men how to be sensitive, how to cry, how to face pain, how to comfort each other? It's just a theory. I can't prove it, but whatever you thought about Mary, you can kind of put that in your picture. Last one, fact or scat? Mary Magdalene was a lady of the night. Boy, you said that so loudly, and you are so wrong. Yeah, it's total scat. That rumor showed up as a rumor. Showed up in the 4th or 5th century. I'm sure no women have ever had rumors put on them like this. But an otherwise really wise pope was trying to fill in some blanks to the story. But he did a terrible job. This is where it came from. This is where the idea came from in the 4th, 5th century. The Bible says she has 7 demons. We just said that. There's 7 deadly sins, which isn't in the Bible, but okay, those 2 sevens. Okay, let's put them together. One of those is lust. Okay, lust is always women's fault. So, Mary Magdalene must be a prostitute. That's where it came from. Yeah, but it ain't her profession. Now, some women in those days did follow that profession. Some widows in that day, when they had no other hope, when they were going to starve to death, they would follow into that profession. But we already learned, she had money, didn't she? So she didn't need to follow in that profession. It's amazing how strongly people will hold on to gross rumors to tear people down. Today is our chance to let that go from Mary. She wasn't. It was a lie. It's always been a lie. It's amazing how strongly people will hold on to gross rumors that tear themselves down. Whatever someone's named about you, probably a lie. Trust in God's grace. Trust in God's mercy. Let's be church. We're going to sing Going to Have Their Fun. You recognize it as the Easter story, right? You caught on to that. So many Marys in that story. I wouldn't blame you if you get all Mary mixed up. Of course, the most famous Mary is Jesus' mother. She gets the most press, and she earned it. But the most mysterious Mary is the one called Magdalene. She has captured the church's imagination for centuries. She has captured Hollywood's imagination. In that process, far too often, the truth gets overlooked and traded for sensationalism. Far too often, the real point that God is making through this woman gets passed over for gossip. Has that ever happened to you? Truth gets passed over for gossip. Someone doesn't see you for the real you, and they make up their own mind, and they tell their own stories, and that takes on a life of its own. It's not fun when you are the victim of that. So let's wipe away all the fake news about Mary and try to get down to who she really was, why she mattered to Jesus, and how she might point each of us to a stronger faith. Unfortunately, we don't really know a lot about her. We know nothing outside the Bible and the story. Actually, everything we know about her, David just read, and what we can gather from that. So that thing about her being a wealthy widow, that's about the best information we have. And I suppose we have good reason to think that when she met Jesus, her life changed. She followed him, served beside him, learned from him, supported his disciples, even financially. And you heard she was there at the crucifixion, at the burial, at the resurrection. She shared her witness to the world. And if that's all we could ever know, if that's the best we have, follow, serve, learn, support, witness, love, share, from all of that, I mean, away from that gossip nonsense, that'd be a great model of faith. I mean, picture that. Wouldn't you love it if someone said that about you to describe your faith? Barbara, you are such a good servant. David, you're such a good learner and supporter. Will, you have a witness of love to share. I mean, if someone named you that way, that'd be amazing. But the even more real Mary, faithful Mary, so often overlooked, I wonder what else we've missed about her life and her story. What else can we figure out? Well, her second name is our best clue. It works sometimes in English. My last name is Wendlandt, which means soil turner. I do garden a lot, but that's not why I'm named Hansen the gardener. But sometimes in ancient times that works really well. Second names tell us a lot about a person. So what does Magdalene mean? In Aramaic, the common language that Jesus spoke in those days, Magdalene means, does anyone know? What's that? Well, it could, but what does Magdala mean first? It means tower. Place, high place. It could be, maybe she's named Tower because she's tall, right? And tall women are sometimes, oh wow, she's really tall. Let's call her Tower, long, tall Sally, whatever it might be. Or she's towering in her importance and her grace. So maybe that fits with this woman of means thing. Or less likely, but kind of funny. There's a line in a Jewish commentary from a couple hundred years later, so we're talking 250 or 270, that some say that Mary was a hairdresser. We have no idea where that comes from. There's no evidence for any of that. But this commentator thinks there's a Mary that's a hairdresser. It's probably not the Virgin Mary. But then some other people, another 100 years later, they start reading that, and they're picturing Mary Magdalene shaping towers of hair, tall towers of hair, like Jewish Marge Simpsons. So if you ever think religion is too serious, just picture that's Mary, the Mary of Marge Simpson. So from funny to sad, we're going to fast forward to the 17th century. So we had already some commentaries. People wondered, who is she? Let's fill in the blanks. Who is she? 17th century, a random Christian commentator, a guy with some real problems, and I don't know why guys always tend to put their problems on women. But this guy in the 17th century was writing about the hairdresser theory. And in his time, there were all these other rumors or all these other stereotypes about hairdressers. And in the 17th century, the guy said, well, obviously, the only women that get haircuts are harlots, which is odd already, but maybe that was the case in the 17th century. I don't know, I wasn't there. And he says the Virgin Mary wasn't a harlot, okay, which means Magdalene must have been a prostitute, which is what the Pope said 500 years ago. This is how that theory got rebroadcast to the world. There's so much wrong with that. It's just ridiculous. It's like rumors of sexuality get so wrapped up in dumb logic because dumb men say dumb things, and you get nothing else out of this service. This is it. Don't believe dumb things. And there's some light in the darkness. But other than Mary being a tower, what else could Magdala mean? That's the word that Jan gave us, Magdala. What else could Magdala tell us about Mary? Well, there was a Hebrew city on the western shore of Galilee called Magdala. In some places it's spelled a little bit different. Today it's still there, called Migdala. Suffice to say, it makes a lot of sense that Mary Magdalene could have been from Magdala, Jesus of Nazareth, Mary of Magdalene, Jesus. It happens a lot. So Magdala back then was a bigger town. It was the regional hub. It's kind of in the mountains. Nederland is the regional hub compared to Rollinsville and compared to Ward. But we're pretty small compared to Boulder, but we're the regional hub here. It had been a regional hub until the Romans started building another bigger city just down the shore when Jesus was in his early 20s. As a regional hub, Magdala had at least a few wealthier people. And you can imagine there weren't many wealthy people in the tiny farming village of Nazareth, but this one, Magdala, was large enough that possibly there were some rich women who would have gathered there when their husbands had died. And also, completely independent of Mary, the Bible says Jesus sailed there a few times, so it's totally reasonable that he could have met her on one of his trips. Now, from outside the Bible, we know that Magdala, the city, was named that because, anyone have a guess why it was named that? It wasn't on a high spot, but it had a tower, so it had a high spot. It had a tower, so it was named the city of Tower, the Tower City. But it wasn't a military tower, so don't picture in your mind like a big tower of stones to look out over everything. The tower was actually a very unique tower. We don't have any of the rest of them anywhere in the rest of the world. This was a huge tower used to dry fish, which is weird. That was their industry. Archaeologists have dug up, they find all the salt. The Greek name for the same city was Tarichia, which means pickling. So it wouldn't be unfair to call her Mary Picklefish. That's kind of what her name means. It sounds way less spiritual, but you're going to remember that. So this is the one possibility about her name, is that Magdala, a tower, would have been, in so many other places, a defensive fortress, but archaeologists say it's not there. It's not like that. There are no military armaments in this city. If it's a tower, it's that tower. If Mary had come from there, she didn't live on a base. She didn't live around Roman veterans. She lived around stinky fish. Okay, so everything else, that's all we know. That's it. You can go read a book, you can go watch anything, but there's nothing else. Everything else is the Inquirer. Everything else is nonsense. That's all we can dig up. But I have a theory. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. I have a theory. Yeah. Everything that comes next is my sanctified imagination about Jesus' message through Mary. It's how Christians have lived it, good and bad, how the gospel writers try to shape it. And it's a possibility about how Mary became a symbolic key to Jesus' message. I can't prove this theory. No one can. No one can dig anything up to prove this theory. I'm not even sure I believe it completely, so if you don't buy it, that's okay. At the very least, the lowest common denominator, God believed in Mary so much that God gave her the message of peace and hope and love and joy in the world. So whatever rumors were attached to her, God believed in her to put her in smack in the middle of the most important story of the world. God believes in you enough to put you in your most important story. So if what I say next is inspirational, paints an even more amazing theory of how God works, awesome. If it sounds like hogwash, fine. Either way, the good news lands back on the hope of new life, and Mary shows what that looks like from her healing from grief, from her service to the disciples, from her changing the world with her witness to new life. Amen? Amen. Okay, here it goes. One, we have several steps here. One, back in the day, the Romans had their own local rulers like Pontius Pilate and Herod. You've heard of them. They were in charge, but also, in order to build some goodwill with the lands they conquered, these rulers let some Jews have some limited self-government. Happens to today. When the U.S. was in charge of Iraq, they at least nominally partnered with local councils and tribes and leaders. And as long as the Jewish regions paid their taxes and followed Rome's rules, they could have their own governor. Got it? Okay, one no. Yeah. Okay, two. In the year 66, that's 33 years after Jesus died, 33 years for the church to grow without him. In 66, the Jews chose this new governor for that Galilee region. Some of you have heard of this guy, Josephus, because later he wrote a history of the Jewish people for the Romans. And And that includes one of the only 2 mentions of Jesus outside of the Bible. So Josephus, the politician turned historian, he became the Jewish governor of Galilee in 66. He was responsible for 17 cities and towns, and his office, it would have been in Magdalene, but earlier they had built this new town called Tiberias. So he's in Tiberias, and just down the road, just a few miles down the road. One of Josephus' first orders of business was to build city walls, and archaeologists have found those walls, dated them to exactly that time, and those walls were definitely built for protection, like a military thing, not like a fish thing. Got it? Okay, that's 2. Number 3. When Josephus built those walls, was he planning for a revolution? I don't know. A lot of people were trying to take back their country from the Romans. A lot of people in Israel were on board with that. You know the story before Easter. Peter goes and stabs a police officer. He's so interested in taking back the country. Peter stabs a police officer, and still Jesus says, "You're the first pope. I'm picking you." So whatever problems we ever have with our messy people, at least we're not to that level, okay? Praise God for that. But a lot of people were very upset. For 800 years, some power or another had been pushing down on Israel. And you can imagine, with every generation, young men grew up, they wanted to revolt. So we know that Rome was worried about them revolting. That's why they were worried that Jesus was going to spark a revolution. And they were kind of right, because in 50 CE, there was this big protest, which Rome squashed down. The phrase to stick your neck out comes from there, where the Jews were like, I'm so tired of being pushed around, I'm just going to put my neck out. If you want to cut it, you can cut it. And the Roman soldiers were like, well, I don't know what to do. So in 66, Josephus wondered, is there going to be a revolt? Would God want that? What can we do? And he built some city walls. In that climate, with the little fights in Jerusalem, little skirmishes in the countryside, arguments all through Israel, Josephus built some walls around Magdalene. Was it a good idea? I don't know. If you were an occupying power and you saw your enemy build some defensive walls, what would military people do? They'd go check on it. They probably want to destroy it. Like, there's some walls coming up. Let's go check this thing out. What's going on? So point 4. 1 year after Josephus started building the walls, this is outside the Bible. We've got the great history. At 67, the Roman general Vespasian, and I know we're on all this history. Hang with me. We're going to land this plane for Mary real soon. Vespasian, he shows up to Tiberias, the Roman capital of the region, just down the road. He had a big army behind him. Knock, knock, knock. Josephus, who's there? Vespasian. Rome's here. Josephus he just is scared out of his mind. So Josephus opens the gate, surrenders. Smart move. Because Vespasian, everywhere else, kills anyone who fought back. And the Roman soldiers knock down a bunch of the Jewish homes. They pass all kinds of laws to squash the Jews. This is the beginning of the end for them. So 3 more years, the little insurrections continued. Rome continued to arrest people until eventually they decide in 70, it's enough. We're going to destroy the temple. Has anyone been to the Wailing Wall? Has anyone seen a picture of the Wailing Wall in a movie? It's all that's left. In 70 AD, they smashed everything else down because they're so sick. The Romans were so sick of people fighting back and building walls and having arguments. So they smash it down. They evict all the Jews from Magdalene. So people have heard about it. Everyone knows they destroyed Jerusalem. They knocked down that temple. What people don't know is in Magdalene, they get rid of all the Jews, they kick them out, and they turn it into a resort town for rich Romans. How offensive is that? Knock down their houses, kick them all out. In 70, they decide to start crucifying more people, more oppression. They pretty much wipe Israel off the map. No more governors. There's not another governor chosen from the Jewish side. No more patience. All destruction. All we're in charge. You obey us now. 6, right then, right in the face of the most oppression in Israel proper, during the time when the revolution was squashed, that is precisely when Matthew and Luke were written. Mark was just a few years before the temple. John was a good bit later, after the Christians were being fed to lions and all that good stuff. But Matthew and Luke, right in the aftermath of the temple being destroyed and Magdalene being wiped off of the Jewish map there, that's when they wrote these books of the Bible, with the good news of new life, showing up at the most important times when people are in the most important struggle. 7, we're going to land the plane. All that history was set up for this possibility. What if Mary, her whole life was just Mary? Her name was just Mary. And then right at that time, when people finally wrote her name down and wanted to save her for history, they decided to add this title to her, Mary of Magdala. Mary of that city. Mary of the city that was so oppressed. Mary of the city that we need inspiration because everything keeps falling down on us. That's destroyed. My life is destroyed. People keep smashing things in my life, the things that matter. People keep smashing hope. People keep smashing down all that I try to build up. All the love I build up, it falls apart. And we need a symbol. We need a symbol of hope from that. It's going to be Mary from that town that just got smashed. And yet she was a great example of faith and service. She was the first witness to the resurrection. But what if the gospel writers were making a deeper point about Mary Magdalene, the symbol of what is broken can be healed, what falls apart can be redeemed, what is buried can be resurrected? That insult of Magdalene, taking the county seat, pushing people out, turning it into a luxury resort for people who were pushing you around, one of the most offensive things that could be done. And for the gospel writers, 40 years after Jesus lived, 40 years after he pointed to Mary and said, live like this, 40 years after he gave Simon the nickname Peter, because renaming people of faith happens all through the Bible, 40 years of changing what the cross meant to show the church the deep power of weakness. What if the early church said, wouldn't it be a Jesus-y thing to make this gentle woman carry on the hopes of a real revolution of the heart rather than young guys with swords? Wouldn't it be a Jesus-y thing to show people who had hoped so much for a military and political revolution and hurt so much at the loss of Magdalene? Wouldn't it be a Jesus-y thing to layer onto that woman who is sensitive, who serves, who loves, who carries the good news of life? If that doesn't make sense, here's my thought experiment to bring that home to our world. Imagine a couple today. They fled from danger in Central America because the gangs were threatening and their government was a mess and they couldn't feed their children. So they come north and they arrive at El Paso, the passage, the path. They seek asylum because that's the legal method in international and U.S. law to come to America. But instead, they get jammed in cages, the children get taken away, they end up in the background of your political football on television. But these are the lucky ones. All that happens to them is their children get ripped away. That's all. These are the lucky ones. Because she's pregnant. And ICE decides to speed up her case so they don't have to deal with a pregnant woman in the cages. And so ICE speeds up their case and sends it back home. Couple. They're terrified to be back because they're back in danger. But she makes it through labor. I told you she's the lucky one. And they have another child, even though their other two are God knows where. And what do they name that child? What if they named that child Paso? Passage. Their neighbors think they're crazy. I mean, could any Jew name their child today Auschwitz? Could any Native American ever name their child Wounded Knee? Of course not. How could they do that? Name a child after a place of such trauma. How could they do that? Well, they could do that because this child would be a light in the darkness. This child would be a passage from despair to hope. This child's name would remind everyone that life is not over. This child's name would tell everyone we will rise up from anything that breaks us. Imagine the remarkable faith it would take for them, for her parents, to give her that name, to make something beautiful out of something so depraved. Now imagine the gospel writers doing exactly the same thing. Mary of Magdalene, lifted up from the ruins. Is that how it happened? Fact or scat? I don't know. It's just a theory. But either way, I think it carries hope for peace and turmoil. Such hope for a church to hold on to love in the midst of hate. Such perseverance for Christians to be like Mary, even in the worst times. Such a message to dig into the ruins of our own lives and find the treasure that will inspire others. That message sounds a heck of a lot like the point of the good news that she witnessed and that she spread to the world. May it be so. Amen.